Hello my friends, my name is Darren Gerdes. This is the three big stories for today. Before we get to the three big stories, I want to talk about the 1740 Russians off the battlefield. That is the high water mark for one day's casualties for Russia. And that's proven that we saw this in Newsweek. Russia suffers highest daily casualties. I talked about that this morning. I also talked about this morning. Russians simply walked in, Ukrainian troops tell Kharkiv tell BBC. So there were no obstacles keeping the Russians from coming toward Kharkiv, and we don't know what it was. They call it a betrayal. We don't know if there was some kind of corruption. We don't know if there was just negligence. We don't know if maybe even there was some kind of ambush that we just don't know about, but apparently they were able to come a lot further than anyone expected them to be able to do. I talked about that this morning in the daily brief and who the new commander is there and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's get to the three big stories. Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil refineries are inflicting pain inside Russia without threatening the global energy supply or driving up oil prices for the rest of the world. Now, that comes from a story here in Foreign Affairs, and I want to cover a number of things here. Why Ukraine should keep striking Russian oil refineries. Okay, in all, Ukraine has launched at least 20 strikes on Russian refineries since October. Ukraine has destroyed around 14% of Russia's oil refining capacity and forced the Russian government to introduce a 6-month ban on gasoline imports. Stop. That 14% is actually higher. That was a number that was like almost a month ago. And the 6-month ban on gasoline exports, that actually happened a year ago as well because Russia needed the gasoline for their agricultural sector. And so they needed to be able to, stop with doing this so that they could do that. But the Biden administration has criticized the attacks. Washington's criticism is misplaced. Attacks on oil refineries will not have the effect on global energy markets that U.S. officials fear. They're worried about it driving up costs for everyone, and higher gas prices don't tend to work out well for the party that is in power just before the election. These strikes reduce Russia's ability to turn its oil into usable products. They do not affect the volume of oil it can extract or export. In fact, with less domestic refining capacity, Russia will be forced to export more of its crude oil, not less, pushing global prices down rather than up, because we're talking about the difference between crude and then the price of refined products. They're two different categories. Indeed, Russian firms have already started selling more unrefined oil overseas. As long as they remain restricted to Russian refineries, the attacks are unlikely to raise the price of oil for Western consumers. So that really kind of threw me when I read that. I was like, well, that's really something. Yet they can still inflict pain inside Russia, where the price of refined oil products such as gasoline and diesel has begun to surge. The strikes are achieving the very objects that Ukraine's Western partners set out but largely failed to meet through sanctions and a price cap on Russian oil. Now remember, this isn't Foreign Affairs. This isn't like Bob's blog or something along those lines. This is something significant. Okay. Ukraine has so far concentrated its attacks on Russian oil refineries, not oil fields or crude oil export infrastructure. The distinction is important. After oil is extracted from a well, it's transported through pipelines and other oil infrastructure into refineries where it's converted into products to be distributed to end users. In 2023, Russia extracted an estimated 10.1 million barrels of oil per day. Of that, about 50% was exported, 50% was refined domestically, like gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel. Half of these refined products were consumed domestically, with a substantial portion diverted to fuel the Russian war machine. Russia also sells refined oil products. Now, but most Western countries have already stopped importing refined Russian fuel. The top destinations for Russia's refined oil products are Turkey, China, and Brazil. And Brazil is just lapping it up. Ukrainian strikes have dealt a significant blow to Russia's refining capacity, knocking out about 900,000 barrels per day. Repairs will be slow and expensive, in part because Western sanctions are hampering Russian firms' access to specialized components. They don't have the ability to rebuild. Okay, Russia's oil storage capacity is limited. When a refinery is destroyed or damaged, therefore, extracted crude oil cannot simply be stocked for later use. This leaves Russian producers with two options: increasing exports of crude oil or shutting down the wells and reducing production. Both are painful. Russia can sell its oil only to select countries, including China, India, and Turkey, who have the facilities to use these specific oil grades produced in Russia, and they do the refining on their own. So these countries have leverage over Russia to buy at lower than market prices. So they're not really getting as much for it as they otherwise would, and they have to get rid of it. Russia must pay market price to meet its domestic and military fuel needs. So that's really an interesting picture of what's going on. If Russia chooses to shut wells instead of increasing exports, the global oil price would indeed rise, but Russia would then face an even sharper increase in the cost of refined products. So they're not going to do that to us because they're not going to do that to themselves. Russia is exporting more crude oil at the same time that its refined fuel exports have hit near historic lows. The strikes have had no discernible effect on international crude oil prices, which remained stable until the end of March, when Russia cut its output under pre-existing agreement with OPEC. Western markets may not be hurting, but Russia is feeling the pinch. So striking at refineries is actually beautiful because it's not doing damage to the West, but it is doing damage within Russia as costing them significantly more. The average weekly wholesale price of gasoline and diesel in Western Russia rose by 23% and 47% respectively between the end of 2023 and mid-March. That's pretty significant for that period of time. Altogether, the political, economic, and military costs are mounting for the Kremlin as the strikes on oil refineries continue. So should they continue striking oil refineries? Absolutely, all day long, twice on Sunday. Good strategy. Ukraine's campaign is working. It's inflicting pain on Russian energy markets, and it's putting exactly the kind of pressure on Moscow that the US-led sanctions regime was designed for but had limited success in delivering. Okay, so this is what sanctions were trying to do. They're actually doing it by destroying oil refining capacity. And let's turn to the other side because Russia's trying to do the same kind of thing to them. And so I saw this article in Reuters. It said Ukraine plans record power imports after infrastructure damage. So they're just going to get so the Russians are trying to put the lights out in Ukraine, but they'll never actually fully put the lights out because they're importing energy from their neighbors. The ministry said that the country facing a significant deficit in the system, it plans to import power from Romania, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, and Moldova. So if the Ukrainians can continue to do that, the lights will never actually fully go out. It'll be more costly, but they can still maintain the power energy grid. Okay. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about what we saw with Shoigu was just fired, and this guy, he's now in. He's a civilian. His name is Bulasov. Okay. Recent changes in the Russian government, what to expect from the new defense minister. Bulasov is a civilian. He's not associated with the military. According to various reports, he's a smart person who has experience with financial reforms. He has worked with Putin before, so he's 100% Putin's man, and he will take orders directly from him. Well, Shoigu was 100% Putin's man, and he 100% took orders from Putin. Shoigu was, I'm kind of sad to see Shoigu go, because he was actually reasonably incompetent and 100% loyal, and that's a great formula here. What Putin really needs is not just the loyalty, but the competence, and I'm not sure whether he'll get it from this guy, but he can't be much worse than Shoigu. His task in his new position will be to reduce corruption flows and redirect the freed up money into the Russian war machine. It's likely that all his anti-corruption activities and revelations will be made quietly and discreetly. Meanwhile, Shoigu's new appointment to Secretary of the Russian Security Council indicates that the council is becoming a dumping ground for has-beens. As for Patrushev, now Patrushev is the guy that put the bomb on the plane, or figured out how to put the bomb on a plane that killed Prigozhin. and he was the head of the Security Council, and now he's been put out to pasture. This leads to the question, who, if anyone, will now have this influence? It's possible it will be Putin himself. However, Putin might not be interested in such a routine work on a day-to-day basis, so that will lead to a series of failures and conflicts, and it remains to be seen. He said one thing is clear, Putin intends to continue this war, absolutely no question about it. Okay, last big story. Estonia is seriously considering the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine for non-combat rear support. Lithuania was already talking about it. They were passing that through their legislature. All they're waiting is for Zelensky to ask. And once one country does it, the dam will burst, no red lines will be crossed, and nothing will happen, and there will be these boots on the ground from these Western countries doing these rear activities. Okay, last little bit. Jake Broe had this fundraiser, and he was trying to raise $40,000 for 2 NAFO trucks. Blew through that. This morning when I showed this, it was like 9 o'clock, something like that, and it was 100, I don't know, he went from, I don't even remember what it was. But about 11 o'clock this morning, I last updated it. He was at $359,000 out of now $400,000 rather than $40,000. And let's update this. It is 5:10 Eastern Standard Time right now and see where he is. He blew through all kinds of records with this campaign. $393,000 by the end of the day. He'll be at $400,000. He's now shooting for $500,000, and I'm pretty sure he's going to get there. This has been remarkable to watch. And if you want to donate, the links will be below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.